You never really hear the laughter all at once. At first, it tickles along the edges, a few stray notifications, the mocking tone of someone's cousin quoting your post with a little string of those laughter emojis. It creeps up slow. But once it pounces, it drags you down, and there's nothing private left about how ridiculous they think you are. On the day that photo went viral, I walked into my uncle's living room in Iztapalapa. The air was thick with the chili sauce my aunt was stirring in plastic kitchen bowls. My phone vibrated constantly in my pocket. My cousin Emilio looked up from his phone, curled his lip, and called out, "Hey, everyone." Monica's famous, with that sing-song venom he reserved for me. He held up his screen, and there I was, sitting on the steps outside that grimy Centro cafe in my Oxo-bought blouse, clutching a notepad, a vague look of determination on my face, and above me, superimposed in block letters. Wants to be a detective journalist, says she'll expose POLITICINS, hasn't even been to college, rolling, rolling, rolling. My aunt covered her mouth, fighting a smile, the laughter rolled and rolled. Detective periodista, Emilio repeated, bastardizing my words, and everyone hooted. My abuela, perched in her usual spot by the window, muttered, "Monica piensa que es la televisión," and shook her head. I'd always been the awkward one, the bookish one, but that day I became the running joke for a barrio of 3 generations. Social media made it worse, screenshot after screenshot, the post shared in WhatsApp family groups, bits of my hopes chewed and spat back as punchlines. Outside, the Mexico City noise kept clattering as if nothing happened, elote steam mixing with the dust, kids on beat-up bikes darting through potholes. But my ears burned. I felt like I had walked into that house naked. Shame isn't a stabbing thing, it's a wet, suffocating cloth draped over everything. By midnight, my DMs and notifications were a wildfire, strangers tossing in their own fuel. Sigue soñando Sherlock Holmes, y tienes la lupa, haznos el favor de no hacer el ridículo por nosotras. I didn't sleep. I watched the city lights twitch through the narrow window above my mattress and promised myself, bitterly, fiercely defeated, one day I would make them eat those words. And then the courage seeps in through the shame like water through old concrete. I kept going, I kept showing up, though every time I did, I felt the eyes of the whole colonia peering through me. I took the metro by morning, packed in with the city's bleary masses, to an unpaid internship with a free all-tweekly in Juarez. I transcribed interviews. My first investigative assignment was barely journalism, more like compiling nasty restaurant reviews. I had no real training, my family couldn't afford university. My peers, all children of doctors or politicos, called my Spanish too informal, my stories too raw. I checked tips, stalked public records, drank burnt coffee in corner stalls while scanning police forums late into the night. My byline was always misspelled. My mother worried quietly but insisted I come to dinner every Sunday, as if with enough caldo de pollo she could nurture me back into something more sensible, a teacher, maybe, or an accountant. But I would just sit there picking at boiled carrots and hearing my relatives butcher the term investigative journalist, a joke stretched thin over months. In the city's din, there are always stories hiding in windowless rooms, the burnt stink of cover-ups, corruption woven through the streets like electric wires. Someone had to pick at those threads. I fell into it out of stubbornness, but eventually it felt like breathing. I grew addicted to the chase, to the sick throb of chasing the truth, even when there was no one cheering for me. I missed birthdays, quinceañeras, anniversaries. I watched friends get married and post their own little successes online. I filed stories for little or no pay and picked up translation gigs to cover rent. Sometimes I took cold showers, toes curled, listening to the tenants next door play reggaeton at 1 a.m., feeling utterly, humiliatingly alone. I was fed scraps, tips from old janitors who'd seen things nobody wanted revealed, threats scrawled on dirty napkins, my stories buried under ads for payday loans and plastic surgeons. Sometimes the only feedback was more dismissal, editors with expensive shoes and tighter smiles. What no one saw were the small victories. The time a mother from Tlalpan called me, whispering that a detective had shaken her down for cash, and I ran the piece. It landed on page 6, but she sent me a voicemail crying, "Gracias, gracias, hijita, nadie me crea." Small victories, but each one cracked a bit more of the shame's hold. Courage crept in disguised as routine. I learned to memorize faces, to follow the double-speak of officials, to keep my voice steady even as my hands trembled beneath the cafe table. I got used to threats and dismissal, to the indifference of the city. I kept receipts, flipped through public records for fun, learned which sources would close up after 2 beers and which would spill secrets after too much mezcal. Years passed this way, a grind of grit and too little validation. Sometimes I plotted escape, running dreaded numbers in my notebook. How long could I stay before I had to quit? Each time I almost gave in, I remembered the laughter, the screenshot, the way even those who loved me most thought me foolish. And then came the story, the one that changed everything. I wasn't special, I just kept scratching at what others let lie. A shifty government land deal in Xochimilco, whispers about developers, a crooked deputy in cahoots with the city's housing director. I chased rumors into alleyways, dug up documents leaked to me at 2 in the morning by a terrified municipal worker. It was messy, dangerous work, familiar with threats and near brushes. One night after I published the piece, I came home to find my apartment door hanging open, my photos of family tossed everywhere, as if the past and present were blended in those violated rooms. I pressed my back to the wall, shaking, but I did not run away. I called the cops, filed the report, sat there as if I dared them to do more, and then suddenly a ripple started. A national paper picked up my reporting. For the first time, my name was spelled correctly, Monica Alvarez, printed beneath the phrase Investigación Exclusiva. The authorities announced an inquiry. TV crews, film crews arrived in Xochimilco. The housing director resigned for personal reasons. My phone started buzzing again, not with jeers but with new kinds of intrusions. Editors I'd never met asked for meetings. Foreign press called. I did interviews on radio shows. Younger cousins started quoting my lines, but now with awe. My mother cried when she heard my voice on the news, this time not with shame but pride. When the city awarded me their Emerging Investigative Reporter prize, I called my mom from the restroom of a downtown theater. She sobbed so hard I could taste salt in my own mouth. That night I wore my thrifted dress, heels I could barely walk in, and stood in the glare of lights as men in suits clapped. But it didn't feel quite real until I returned to Iztapalapa for the first time with the medal in my bag. It was almost 5 years after that first viral post. Everything felt smaller, my old street with its stray dogs, the papleria where I bought my first notepad, even the battered soccer goal on the apartment block's dirt patch. I trudged up the stairs, the familiar pockmarks in the cement welcoming me home. My mother met me at the door, eyes already watery as if my presence conjured every emotion she'd carried for years. My Aunt Veronica was there, stirring lunch again, squinting as though she couldn't quite believe it was me. Emilio, now working for a logistics company, sprawled on the couch with that same too cool glare, phone always handy. We sat for a meal, rice, beans, roasted chicken. I could feel them shifting, uncertain, watching me as if for signs of who I had become. The conversation rolled clumsily. Elena, my youngest cousin, finally piped up, "So, Prima, are you famous now?" Emilio snickered. She broke the internet again. "Pero esta vez it's for real." The tone was lighter, even respectful. Still, I let it slide. The air shifted when my mother brought out a small bundle wrapped in a dish towel, my medal, and 3 clippings from newspapers. I felt my face flush as she placed them before me on the table, nudging them like a peace offering. My abuela reached for her glasses, peering at the article's headline and then blinking up at me as if for the first time. "You really did it, Nina," she whispered. For her, that was an epic speech. Outside, the neighborhood kids were shouting at each other over ancient video game sounds spilling from a window. Beyond, the whole city seemed to buzz. I felt something ease inside me, a knot unraveling, shame finally letting go. I wanted to tell them how hard it had been, not just the late nights or the threats, but the isolation. How shame lived in my bones for years, how I sometimes longed to quit and imagined a safer life, one padded by quiet mediocrity. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "It was worth it, but I missed you." Later that afternoon, the neighborhood called. Word had spread, maybe from my uncle, maybe from a nosy neighbor who saw the medal. At first, it was the kids, clustering around the entryway, mostly out of curiosity. Then the older neighbors drifted in, Don Felix, who years ago had boasted that no woman from our block would ever get farther than the OXXO cash register. Lupita, who watched me walk to the metro all those mornings, convinced I was heading for disappointment. Someone, I think it was my aunt, brought out my old stories on her phone. One by one, they scrolled through the investigation, the links, the government statements, the front page headlines with my name, the pictures of politicians resigning, the crowds gathered at City Hall, the footage of me being interviewed. People muttered, pointing at the screen, some in wonder, some like Felix in stubborn disbelief. El mundo está cambiando, eh? He grunted, giving me a stiff nod. I felt 1,000 eyes on me, but this time not as a spectacle, as proof. A moment hung in the silence, thick with pride and awkwardness and a little bit of old envy. Washed through it all was something pungent and new, a recognition that no ridicule could erase. I took a deep breath and let the noise wash over me. Someone started clapping awkwardly and others joined. I laughed, a rusted, startled sound, shrugging as the hands patted my shoulder, the old jokes traded now for cautious congratulations. After dinner, as the apartment emptied, my abuela lingered. She touched my cheek with hands that smelled of lemon and disinfectant. No diges quenaditi quite tu valor Monica. We stood by the window, the city's haze pivoting between gold and grey. I saw my own reflection set against the dusk. For so long I'd carried that shame, let it define the way I moved through the world. Now it felt smaller, manageable. I knew many of them would tomorrow find a new joke, a new target. The city chews up pride almost as fast as it dismisses hope, but I had returned whole, carrying proof of my own courage. Later that night I wandered the familiar streets. Balloons from some forgotten party bobbed in a gutter. The scents of fried corn and jet fuel braided together. I walked past the mural of Emiliano Zapata that used to terrify me as a child, his big mustache stern over the passage. La tierra es de quien la trabaja. I thought of the stories left to chase, the truths still to be dug up. For the first time I knew the laughter couldn't bury me. I stood on the cracked steps outside the apartment, where years ago I'd taken that fateful photograph, and breathed deep. The city stretched before me, waiting. My shame was gone. In its place was courage, not the clean, hero story kind, but the battered, persistent sort that comes from not giving up even when no one believes in you. I walked inside. Behind me the door closed with a gentle thud, the kind only home can make, and the rest of the noisy city carried on, its stories waiting to be told.